If you are looking to plant a church, we highly recommend investing in a church planting residency to help you learn and grow before you plant. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 6 things to look for in a church planting residency.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Adrosian. Joining me is Dylan Dotson. And today we're talking about 6 things to look for in a church planting residency.
So planting residencies are a pretty big thing now. You know, you go and you're ready to plant a church, so you go somewhere and train for a year or two, and then you go and plant a church. I did a church planting residency. I might have shared on the past episodes that my experience was not the best one. And so we wanted to give you 6 things to look for if you're looking to plant a church and you're looking for a church planting residency, which, by the way, we think is a great idea.
Yes.
And so in no particular order, here are some things to look for, to consider, maybe even to ask before you commit to a church planting residency.
Can't wait.
Here's number 1. Does this church have a history of planting? So in other words, are you the first church planter they've ever had?
The pioneer.
They've had a lot of them in the past. Here's what I would I think. I think if you are the first resident the church has ever had, that is could be a good thing if they're excited
not a bad thing.
What I more mean is, the place that, for example, if you do a residency somewhere who has had residents in the past and they don't end up launching very often, or the place I did a residency has had a few in the past, but the only one that ever launched was a guy that did it 6 years before I did, and he went into the residency with already a ton of ministry experience. And so, me not really thinking through things, looking back, I said, that could have showed me that maybe this residency wasn't going to be that organized or put together because they don't have a history of planting.
Right.
So the place that you're going, especially if you're raising your own financial support, which is what I did, you have a lot more options than you may think you would if you were raising your own money to do it somewhere. But just ask them if you're not sure, like how many guys have you planted? Are those churches still around? Because that will probably show you whether or not they're serious about it or how healthy their planting process is.
Now, would you have a problem with a church, say, because I think if you're thinking you might be the first one planting a church, so probably the thing that comes to mind is this is probably a newer church that's getting their foot into the church planting world. But what if it's an old church? This church has been established for a long time, but they're just kind of now bringing on residents. Do you have a problem with that?
To me, no. I don't have a problem with if it's the first one, because typically if it's the first one and there's excitement, maybe it's not going to be perfect, but they want it to go well, you want it to go well. When I say do they have a history of planting, I kind of mean more, have they planted churches in the past, or do they say they're a church planting church, but they've hardly planted any. Like normally if it's the first church they've ever planted, they don't go around saying, we planted churches, we do all these things.
Right.
But if they do say those things, they don't have a history of it, that could be a red flag for you.
Right.
So number 1, do they have a history of planting? You can ask, before you get in there.
There you go.
Here's number 2. Is the lead pastor, or if it's a larger church, the church planting resident coordinator person, invested in you and the program? It's not very helpful to go somewhere if the lead pastor is not into church planting, which is going to be most churches, or if it's a very large church, they might have someone, which is pretty rare, but some of the bigger churches have someone who's full-time dedicated to planting churches.
Yeah.
Are they invested in you? Do they not just say they want to plant churches, but do they want to see you succeed? Are they going to take time to talk with you, to train you? If they're not, it's not going to be helpful for you, because you're trying to learn something from people who may not spend much time. It won't go very well.
So how would you determine that before starting?
A couple of it is so why are you doing, why this church? Is it because a friend recommended it? Is it because someone on staff was like, no, this is a good thing to do? I mean, obviously you would probably meet with the lead pastor or the church planting people before. Do you guys connect at all? Do they seem interested and excited to have you on?
Yeah.
Or is it more kind of like, oh, sure, you can come and we can do this thing? If it's kind of more of a nonchalant attitude, you'd want to be wary. But are they excited about you? Of course, you can't know till you're in it if they're actually going to be investing in you and making sure you're doing well. But you can kind of tell, they didn't seem too into it, or they kind of said, yeah, if you want to do this. I think maybe another way to look at this is is there any kind of vetting process to plant through them? Not that it has to be this hardcore thing, but if they're just kind of willy-nilly, anybody can plant through us, and you have one meeting, and then it's probably they're not that
Probably
invested.
not very invested.
So is there a process you had to go through? Are they excited about it? And again, going back to they have a history of it, I think those 2 things can really help you decide whether or not this is a good church or not.
Right.
So again, is the lead pastor or the coordinator of the church planting residency invested, not just in planting churches, but it look like they're going to want to be invested in you? Here's number 3. Do they financially fund their church plants? So this is a great way.
That's a good one.
Everybody wants to plant churches.
Yeah.
But actually doing it is another thing. So do they have a history, and are they going to promise you, granted that things go well,
Right.
that there's going to be a that doesn't have to be a lot, especially if it's a smaller church. But if they're actually into it, your dollars will show it.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of promises like, oh, I think we'll probably launch you, or we'll invest in you, but we can't tell you how much, or we're not quite sure. It depends on what the budget's going to be. That could be signs that they're not as invested as this and there. Now, of course, all those things are real, but if they can't give you a solid answer, especially if they want you to go through it, it should not be. It depends on what the budget is.
Yeah.
It should be. We're not sure how much it's going to be. It might depend on the budget, but we're going to give you something. Like they're just. If there's not a solidify, here's what this will look like if all things go well. Here's our plan. It could change, but here's what we would like to see invested. If they can't give you any sort of financial number, it probably means they're not as invested in church planting as they say they are.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us like to talk about it. Very few churches will actually go and do it.
Yeah, and if you're a church that's serious about planting churches, you should have it in the budget what you're going
Right.
to what you're going to put towards it, whether that's a small amount or a large amount. But I don't think that should be a hidden number
Right.
with your residents.
And that's a great point. Like for us at New City Church, it's church planting funds are in the budget. Now, we're a newer church, and so that can fluctuate, but there is going to be something there.
Yeah.
And so the guarantee is we will financially support you. Maybe not, but you're going to have it. And to us, it's going to be sacrificial.
Yeah.
If they can't tell you we're not quite sure,
Yeah.
to me it would be a red flag of maybe they're not as invested as they say they are going to be.
Yeah, and I think questions like this are a little easier to tell just based on how they're answered, whether they're
Right.
whether it's kind of beating around the bush and kind of wanting to avoid the question versus, honestly, we're new to this and we have it in the budget. We don't know how much that'll be at this time. I think getting a straightforward answer versus getting kind of a wishy-washy
Right.
answer
And you
is kind
can
of an easy way to determine that.
Because again, if it's the first time they plan
Yeah.
a church, but you can tell like, are they into this or are they
Yeah.
not? And I think you should not be scared of asking that question because you want to plant a church. You don't just want to get a 1 year of training. Like you want it
Sure.
to be a long-term
Yeah.
relationship. And so ask that. Do they financially fund their church plants? Here's number 4. What is their philosophy of ministry? Now, here's the deal. All churches are different. Like, there's not going to be any church that's going to do everything the way that you want it to be done. I mean, as the lead pastor of New City, we don't even do things if it was all up to my preference.
Yeah.
And so we're not talking about, like, making sure they do everything. They do the same amount of songs. They do whatever, everything that you want.
Right.
But is there enough there that you would want to take and emulate, maybe change a few things? And if not, are you comfortable being trained by a place that you want to do very few with? I would just say
Right.
this. You don't have to take everything, but I think the majority of stuff you should want to say going into. I mean, you can't know everything, especially if you're not on staff beforehand or you're new to the church. But it's like, okay, there seems to be enough here that I would want to emulate, because otherwise you're not learning what you actually want to do.
Right.
If you're at a place that's doing a bunch of stuff the way that you don't want to do it.
What do you think would be the best way to determine that? Do you think it'd be spend some time in the church as attending beforehand, or just kind of longer discussions with the people leading it?
Yeah, I mean, I think both are helpful. I mean, I wouldn't go to a church one weekend and say, "Oh, we're going to do a residency
Right.
there." Like,
Yeah.
give it some time. Like, is even stuff in the service. It's like maybe not the. I don't mean the giftedness of the preacher, but like the style, the worship style, how their serve team and volunteers operate. Is it a welcoming culture? Like, are there things that's like, and you know this pretty quickly. Like, oh, in an ideal world, we would do something similar to that.
Sure.
If there's very few things, or if you find yourself saying, yeah, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't do that, not in an arrogant way, but like, I don't think I'm down with that. I think sometimes we can get so excited, especially if someone says yes, they'll take us on,
Yeah.
that we'll just take the first thing that was my situation instead of spending time making sure it's actually a good thing. And so if there's a lot of stuff that you were like, no, but if there's a lot of stuff that you would want to emulate, that's probably a good sign that this might be a good place for you.
Yeah, and I think this is something that you can almost feel kind of guilty about, because you want to learn to plant a church, and so I don't know. I think you can kind of talk yourself into looking past some of these things and thinking, well, I want to learn to plant a church. These things might not be as important, but in reality, you're going to learn how to plant a church.
Right.
You're going to learn how to run a church the way that you're being trained. And so if you're being trained in a way that you're never going to actually want to emulate.
Well, even with that, I think some people could say, well, I've always grown up in this tradition, so I just want to get a different experience before I plant.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you have questions after you launch, and when you're never going to go back to the people that you had a relationship with. Like,
Right,
that's just not
yeah.
helpful to spend a year somewhere that you're never going to use going forward. And so, yeah, I would go somewhere that you're excited about. Otherwise, you're going to be frustrated during the residency, and that the relationship that you built could have been built somewhere else that actually would have been helpful for you long term.
Right.
So number 4, philosophy of ministry is those things you're excited about or things are not. Here's the 5th thing that you can look at when you're looking for a church planting residency. Different than philosophy of ministry, but just theological clarity, if you will.
Okay.
Again, they don't have to do everything, every single doctrine. I mean, not the big ones, but like different ones than you. There's going to be, that's fine. But is there enough stuff that you would say, yes, I agree, or I disagree? Now, this one may be of all of these, like the most obvious. But if there's something that they do that you really are like, I'm not comfortable, like it's going to frustrate you, and it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Like, for example, and maybe, I don't know if this is a good example or not, maybe you believe in believer's baptism or infant baptism, like whatever side of the debate you all fall on, and you're going to do a residency at a church that does the opposite of you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think that's a deal breaker at all, but are you going to be okay with that? And, or is it going to be like, to me, I understand this is not like a salvation type thing, but it just makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Just make sure that you're theologically good and okay with it. As opposed to not. And if you're newer to the church, ask these questions. Like, you don't want to be 6 months in and then realize, they're pretty big on something that you're uncomfortable with.
Right.
Because again, like we talked with philosophy of ministry, you want this place ideally to be a place that you can learn and grow from even past the residency. And if there's a lot of things that make you uncomfortable, it makes it really hard to learn and grow.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to maybe this isn't the right word, but kind of selective in who you're choosing, and not in an arrogant way as in like I deserve better than what this church is offering, but be selective in the sense of you want something that'll line up with your beliefs and what you plan to do. And if you just kind of take the first thing that comes about, you may have, on your resume or whatever, checked off that you did a church planting residency, but you're not gonna be able to actually take those things that you actually need from it throughout your life.
And with that too, we talk about philosophy and theology. In some instances, theology does impact the philosophy of ministry as well. And so I would just say, it's not that the church needs to be 100% how you would do it. That's not at all. But just make sure that there's not some big uncomfortable, I wouldn't do that. I'm not excited about that.
Right.
Because that could cause problems and frustrations for you down the road. And here's the last one. Now, the last one is maybe the most important one of all of these.
Oh, more important than theology?
Maybe. Assuming it's not the big stuff. Don't get me in trouble, Brian. And it's this thing that we should always ask ourselves about anything that we do with our ministries, and that I don't think people do because they have all these spiritual reasons not to ask it.
Right.
Here's the 6th thing that you should look at in a church planting residency. Is this church that I'm doing my residency a place that I would invite my friends? That's the big question. Like, if you want to reach more people and grow, you've got to make it so where people want to invite people. Here's the deal. If you're doing a residency at a church, especially if you're launching in the same area as that church, but even if you're moving, ideally, in an ideal world, a lot of the people that are joining your church plant are from the church that you're at.
Right.
And as you meet people in the community, all that sort of thing, but until you start your Sunday morning gatherings and all that stuff, it would be an ideal world, at least you're worshiping somewhat together.
Yeah.
And if you can't invite anybody to this church, then it's probably not a good sign that you should go there, because you probably don't want to learn and do a lot of the things that they're doing. Yeah. So would you invite your friends there? Because also too, if you are gathering people on your launch team from this church, and maybe you're at it, and so you're inviting them until you launch, they're going to be learning a lot of stuff from this church. And so if you completely do a 180 to everything that they're used to, that will also not be good. And so is this a place that I would invite my friends to is a bigger deal than we make it, because if you're not excited about it, chances are you won't be excited about inviting your friends. Your friends want to invite their friends, and your launch team will not be what it could be.
Well, I mean, you made a good point. I don't have a whole lot to add to it, but if this is where you're going to be doing your residency, you're not going to be there alone. You can't go on from there all by yourself and plant a church alone. Your people are either going to be from there or coming to there. And if it's not a place that you'd be comfortable inviting people, even if you think in your head, I'm going to do a complete 180 and what I do is going to be totally different, and then I'll invite people to it, you're not going to be starting with anything. Right. I mean, I think that you're right. That's kind of one of those things that I think everyone kind of has in their mind, like, yeah, that makes sense, but no one wants to say out loud. Right. No one wants to admit that I wouldn't want to invite my friends here, but I think that's a huge one.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I think it's really easy to excuse, well, I'm only going to be here for a year or two, so I'll look past this thing, just trust me, like on the other side of it.
Right.
You be patient, don't rush into a residency, make sure it's something you're comfortable with. that will bode much better for your sanity and the future health of your church. And so, again, the 6 things to look for in planting in a church planting residency: do they have a history of planting? Is the lead pastor invested in church planting? Do they financially fund their church plants? What is their philosophy of ministry? What is their theology? And lastly, is this a place I would invite my friends? So thanks for being with us today. As always, you can go to practicalplanting.com/questions. Submit a question. We'll talk about it in a future episode. And until next time, we'll see you on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.